With Legends ZA releasing in less than a month, I'm sure you want to get the most out of your first playthrough of the game, and today, I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm sure you're really excited, and you should be. But will you really appreciate the full weight of the story when you arrive? Will the return of Mega Evolution feel as epic as it can when you don't know the true cost involved in the creation of Mega Evolution? This guide breaks down the absolute must-play games that you need to experience to understand the lore and the gameplay of the return to the Kalos region. Let's get you ready for Legends ZA. If you only play one of the games on this list, it has to be Pokemon X or Y. If you're talking about the Kalos region, this isn't just a recommendation, it's sort of required reading. To understand the Kalos that we're going into, the futuristic Kalos that we are seeing in Legends ZA, you need to understand the Kalos that Pokemon has brought us before. X and Y are the foundation for what we see in Legends ZA, both in story and in gameplay. They were the games that introduced Mega Evolution. Think of these games as your textbook for the history, the lore, and the beauty of the Kalos region. Let's start with the lore, because the story of Kalos is one of the most ambitious stories Pokemon's ever told. The whole story revolves around one mysterious figure, AZ. When you meet him, he's just this towering, sad man dressed in rags who speaks in riddles and then moves on. But as you travel through Kalos, you slowly piece together his history. Over 3,000 years ago, AZ was the king of the Kalos region, right in the middle of a really brutal war. And in that war, his beloved Pokemon partner, his Floette, got killed. And that sort of set off the story for the whole of Pokemon X and Y. After losing his friend, AZ was lost to grief. And in his grief, he built a machine that could actually bring his beloved Pokemon back to life. However, this machine had sort of a dark secret behind it. It was powered by the life energy of Pokemon. And not only did AZ use it to bring his Floette back to life, he then turned the machine on the two warring armies, destroying both of them. In the process, he accidentally granted himself and his Pokemon eternal life. But there wasn't a happy ending here. His revived Pokemon was disgusted by the means he used to get it back, and it left him. So by the time we meet him in Pokemon X and Y, AZ has been cursed to wander the world alone for 3 millennia, dealing with the fallout of his actions as king. This story is the soul of Kalos. It's a tale of loss and love for people and Pokemon that was so powerful it scarred the entire region when it went wrong. And it's the same weapon that Team Flare uses in Pokemon X and Y. Lysander is a descendant of the king's brother, and he wants to use the same machine AZ once used to create his own twisted, beautiful world, essentially repeating AZ's mistakes 3,000 years later. The entire plot of X and Y is a desperate race between you, the player, AZ, and Lysander to stop this from happening. And it's not like this ancient history doesn't tie into the gameplay, because when this ultimate weapon was unleashed 3,000 years before Pokemon X and Y, the energy of that weapon that hit the Pokemon world didn't only erase the two armies, it also hit various stones, turning them into Mega Stones and allowing for Mega Evolution as we know it. Playing through X and Y before Legends ZA lets you understand the impact of Mega Evolution on the region, lets you meet the characters who tie into it, like Korina, the gym leader whose family guards the secret to Mega Evolution, the one who teaches you about Mega Evolution in the game itself. And also the Pokemon that you start your journey off with, Chestnut, Greninja, and Delphox, are confirmed to be getting Mega Evolutions in Pokemon Legends ZA. So if you've played through one of them as your first partner in Pokemon X and Y, it'll be even more exciting for you to use a Mega Evolution when it comes to Legends ZA, because we've been waiting for that for the last 12 years. On top of that, there's also the real-world idea of the fact that X and Y were the first Pokemon games on the 3DS, and they were the first games to fully embrace the 3D look and feel. To understand what Lumiose City means now in Legends ZA, you have to look at it back as it was in X and Y. This city that actually defined what the 3DS could do for Pokemon. The city that you actually unlocked as you played through the game. You unlocked more areas, you explored the city more, and you unlocked more ability to travel through that city as you went through the game. Lumiose City is literally the center of the Kalos region, and having Legends ZA sit here, in one of the places that actually means the most in the entire region, is a great way to connect the Kalos region back to its origins in X and Y. And that's not even mentioning Zygarde. It's mentioned in the name, Legend ZA. Not only is that a play on the word AZ, the king's name, it's also a reference to Zygarde, the third legendary Pokemon of Pokemon X and Y that never got its own game in the vein of Pokemon Emerald, Pokemon Platinum, and Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 being centered around Kyurem. Zygarde never got its own game, but it's known as the guardian of the Kalos ecosystem. The anime has a much more expanded role for Zygarde than the games did, and with this being titled Legends EA, and the nods we've seen to Zygarde in the trailers already, it's hard to imagine that we won't see its role as guardian of the ecosystem if anyone tries to disrupt that balance again in Pokemon Legends EA. Now, while X and Y will give you the story, if you want to know how the gameplay works, that's when you look to Pokemon Legends Arceus. If you walk into Lumio City expecting a classic turn-based Pokemon game like we've had before, you're in for a bit of a shock, because these are going to be real-time battles, and this all started with Pokemon Legends Arceus. Now, playing Legends Arceus is not a lore requirement, but it's definitely your gameplay homework if you want to go in knowing how the mechanics work, or at least the foundation of how the mechanics will work, since we know that Legends EA actually expands on and changes some of the mechanics from Legends Arceus. The biggest change that Legends Arceus brought was it was no longer a turn-based game. It was an action RPG. Forget the linear routes and static encounters. In Legends Arceus, you were dropped into the wild and Pokemon could be caught in real time. They could also attack you, so you needed to be able to get out of the way, dodge, and control your trainer in real time, reacting to the world around you. We've never had to do that before in a Pokemon game, but in Legends EA, that's not only expanded to the world around you, but also to the battles, because moves work differently in Legends EA. Your trainer reacting to the moves will mean your Pokemon reacts to the moves, and to get a feel for controlling your trainer, that's where Legends Arceus comes in. But that's not its only benefit though. Legends Arceus also had a huge focus on crafting and research. You gathered materials out in the world to craft Pokeballs, to craft items that you needed for catching Pokemon. The entire focus was on completing your Pokedex. And here in Legends EA, where there's a dual focus on catching Pokemon and battling, we don't know how many Pokemon you might need to catch to be able to unlock specific rewards, because it seems like with Mabel being the head of the Pokemon research unit, that you may actually need to catch Pokemon to get rewards and to fulfill tasks. Again, if you're playing Pokemon Legends Arceus, you'll get a feel for how these tasks work, how to complete them, and how to fill up your Pokedex to actually get these rewards. So by the time you get into Legends EA, it doesn't feel like you dropped into a completely alien environment. Not to mention, Legends Arceus was one of the best things that we got in terms of Pokemon timeline. We learned how Sinnoh looked in ancient times. Looking at that 100-year-old Sinnoh and seeing how things changed and evolved over time allowed us to appreciate more not only how Sinnoh was in present day, but the actual work that went into crafting the region itself based on established lore in Pokemon Legends Arceus. With Legends EA, we know that it's set in the future, so looking at the Kalos region that we had, looking at the things that we think could have been done differently, and then looking at what we get in Legends EA will help you understand how Kalos has transitioned from the present of X and Y to the future of Legends EA. Okay, we've covered the basics, but now we're getting into more advanced stuff. If you played X and Y, you know the story. If you played Legends Arceus, you know the gameplay. But if you really want to know the potential of Pokemon Legends EA, there's another set of games you need to play, and that is the other game in Generation 6 that introduced Mega Evolution, Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the Delta episode. On the surface, Arceus is just a remake of the Gen 3 games, but if you look a little deeper, there's a lot more to it. Not only does this Hoenn introduce Mega Evolution, it also drops a lot of lore in the post-game Delta episode, telling you a lot more about the Hoenn that we see in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In X and Y, we're told that the ultimate weapon being fired was the reason for the creation of Megastones. But in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we get a slightly different story. We meet Zinnia, a descendant of an ancient people called the Draconids, and the story she tells is about Groudon and Kyogre reaching their primal forms and the formation of a Megastone between Rayquaza and the Draconid people. Now that Megastone wasn't born of the ultimate weapon, it was born of the people's wish and the bond between those people and Rayquaza, allowing Rayquaza to Mega Evolve for the first time. Now it's likely that there was infinity energy involved in that as well, and that also comes into play in the Delta episode, because when you're at Mars Deep Space Station and that meteor is hurtling towards Earth, the plan is to actually warp that meteor away with infinity energy. And this is where Pokemon drops one of the biggest lore bombs we've ever got. It confirms a multiversal Pokemon theory. Now we know about this with the Ultra Beasts, that there are dimensions outside our own, but Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire don't just confirm that there are dimensions outside our own, but that there are actually parallel regions. The idea of a Hoenn where Mega Evolution didn't exist. Now does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because that was the first Hoenn we were introduced to in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire seem to be existing in a different universe to the original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Emerald, explaining why there's Mega Evolution in one version of Hoenn, but not the other. And in the version of Hoenn that we see in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, it would seem to imply that the ultimate weapon was never built there. So Mega Stones and Mega Evolution don't exist. Infinity energy is not a concept. But this single plot point opens up so many possibilities for Legends ZA. Is the Lumiose city that we're going to be revisiting in Legends ZA the same one we visited in the original Kalos? It seems so from the characters we've seen returning, but again, we don't know. There could be subtle differences in the lore of this Legends ZA universe than they were in the original X and Y. Pokemon opened up a rabbit hole with that multiverse theory in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but what it did do also is give them an opportunity to innovate and to change things that they think could be done better in universe. And in doing so, they can tell us that this Kalos is set slightly differently to the one that we've seen before. Personally, I'd prefer if they keep it the same and just do a continuation of the lore and let us see what happens from there. But if they choose to go the parallel universe route, I wouldn't be mad about it because, to be honest, it's a really interesting angle. But we're not done just yet, because if you really want to go the extra mile, there is one more place that you'd want to visit, and that's the Crown Tundra in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, if I'm talking about the Crown Tundra, you may be wondering, why the Crown Tundra? What connection does this have to Kalos? Well, it's not so much of a direct connection, but it is a connection that you might want to get if you are into collecting things. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, in the Crown Tundra DLC, there's something called Dynamax Adventures, and in Dynamax Adventures, you can get shiny legendary Pokemon, including Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde, and you can get a Zygarde with Power Construct. So the idea is, if you want a shiny version of the legendaries going into Pokemon Legends ZA, we don't know if they're going to be shiny locked or not. Pokemon has made a habit of this over the last few years. All the Scarlet and Violet legendaries were shiny locked. The Legends Arceus legends, the main box art legends, were shiny locked. So hopefully they're not going to do the same thing with Legends ZA, but if they do, and you want shiny legendaries from Generation 6, Pokemon Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra DLC is where you want to go to get them. Because if you're like me, having shiny legendaries that directly tie into the game that you're playing is a dream come true, and you'd really want to have those. But let me know down in the comments below, what game will you be replaying before Legends ZA comes out to make sure you get the most out of this experience? Are you going to replay any of the old games? Have you replayed them? And if so, which ones? Let me know down below. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on future videos, because I am planning on doing a whole series on this, and of course getting back to our Pokemon legendary and mythical lore. On that note, I'm pretty sure I have a video up here that you might be interested in if you like this one, so go give it a watch. I promise you, you won't regret it.